you are welcome along to the latest edition of the Huddle Breakdown, which this week is the second in our series of Love Island, with a new participant to Huddle Breakdown Love Island being invited on this week. Mr. Martin Murphy is our guest host this week, so I'm here to introduce him first. As we did for Laura. You got big shoes to follow in here, Martin.
Absolutely, yeah, I did notice that. I thought, wow, so I thought high expectations after last week, but I'll certainly do my best, yeah.
Well, and the bona fides, Alan and I get a lot of criticism, a lot of insults, spreadsheet shagger, virgin, all this other stuff. But probably the one that stings the most is that we're not match-going fans. And I think after all of this 3+ years of criticism, that's the big box that you check, Martin, is that you're actually someone that goes to matches. So you can finally come on here and teach Alan and I what the hell's going on with people's eyes inside the stadium. So welcome. Thank you for taking the time. Quick shout out to I think it was Lawrence from Axum that kind of put us.
That's correct. Yes.
Yep, Lawrence Connolly. So give him a quick shout out here at the beginning. Thank you, Lawrence, for connecting us to Martin. But similar to last week, I'm just going to kind of hand it over to you now and let you run with the show, and let's have some fun.
Wonderful, yeah, looking forward to it. And again, thanks ever so much for inviting me on. I've been very much looking forward to it. And as you say, a big shout out to Lawrence again. All the work he does in Axom, absolutely wonderful. Just to clarify, it wasn't your family that were giving you this sort of abuse, was it? Was it online abuse and all the data abuse and so forth?
All the above. I get different kinds of abuse at home. It's not so much about spreadsheets and football data, but fair enough.
Yeah, I feel the pain. I suppose for me, linking a little bit with the last one, the last episode, I feel a bit like Charlie Bucket at the moment. I just feel as if I've got that chocolate on. I'm seeing the golden ticket to the data factory and now stepping in. Hopefully nothing horrible is going to happen to me. But as I say, very much looking forward to it in any case. I won't go down the road of who the Oompa Loompas are or anything like that either. But I think for me, people are obviously tuning in to hear you guys, so I really like to get straight into that. Obviously, a lot happening at the moment at the time of recording, but if we start as we normally do, looking at the last match, so Hibs at Easter Roads. Often a bit of a graveyard for us in terms of getting full points. Brendan Rodgers, until recently, struggled there as well as a manager, up until a chap called Idah, I think, scored a late winner, which proved pretty crucial. Now we're on a bit of a roll up there. Overall, the start of the season, including the game, I thought it's been very, very pleasing. A lot of good football. If I could come to you first of all, Alan, where did you see Celtic's strengths? Really, where was the game won?
Yeah, so listen, first of all, welcome, Martin, and just because we do like a really bad analogy here, so thank you for your Charlie in the Chocolate Factory one. You have slightly come to the wrong place because you do know that we're going to be measuring your sugar intake, monitoring your diet. but I understand the sentiment, so thank you for that. So listen, yeah, I think I kind of looked at this in terms of I picked out sort of three negatives, you like three positives. So I'll answer your question in reverse because I want to get the negative stuff out of the way first, and then I'll come to the what did I think went well. So a bit like last week. Listen, again, context is everything here. Hibs were awful. I mean, really quite. I mean, dispiritingly so. I mean, beyond we got 3 points. I'm happy, of course I am, but that was an appalling display from them. And this should be one of the biggest clubs in Scotland. And then the reason that's kind of exercising me in that way is on the back of the Kilmarnock performance the week before, where they don't seem capable of being able to fit in a trip to Celtic Park between two European matches. I kind of get that for a club of limited resources. That was a tough ask, although I think McInnes made that into an excuse for poor performance. And I watched the best part of both Kilmarnock and St Mirren in midweek there, both playing against Norwegian opposition. Now, look at historical results in Europe between Scotland and Norway, clubs from Scotland and clubs from Norway. Generally speaking, Scottish clubs have trounced teams from Norway until more recent times. And in both of those matches, although Kilmarnock and St Mirren both ended up with home draws, they were largely outclassed in terms of the quality of the football that was being played. So I think the start to the season is great from Celtic's perspective, but I think the standard of the league just seems to be ever decreasing. The neighbours across the city, as I said before, are a kind of delinquent shambles. The bright spot might be Aberdeen. It looks like they may have got a good manager, and they may have got started to get their recruitment right. Although they probably just sold their best player. So they may give us hope in terms of the overall quality of the league. And if Hearts had a competent manager, I think they've got a squad that could probably challenge as well. But so that was not a negative, but it's just, again, it's context which probably doesn't, it takes away the shiny stardust a little bit from Celtic, but not to say that there wasn't some good stuff which we'll come to. Other sort of thing that concerned me a little bit was just a couple of the individual performances. I wrote in the week about how Scales is just absolute ball hog in 2 games. He's up to nearly 300. I think he's over 300 passes in 2 matches. It's just incredible. His pack passing, again, excellent. But again, defensive duels, especially headed duels, really poor again. And I think I've worked out one of the reasons why he logs so many passes. That's because many of his passes are to somebody whose only option is to pass it straight back to him, and that's happened so many times, because he doesn't. He's either just that second too late, or he doesn't pick quite the right pass, or deliver it to quite to the foot that's open to allow the turn, etc. So I mean, listen, I'm not speaking anything new there. The other one that was a bit more of a shock after last week was Hatate. A really, really, almost off the scale bad performance. He actually had a negative packing score at half time, which for a creative midfielder takes some doing. He completed one pack pass in the whole game. And he delivered that performance with the sort of surly demeanour of a 14-year-old that's been told that on a Saturday afternoon he's been dragged to see his old auntie rather than to the football kind of thing. He just looks such a surly, unhappy individual. So that there were two kind of rather disappointing aspects of it. But the thing was, we could carry those performances and still easily beat this Hibernian team. And the last sort of slight moan from me on it, it's just, which we'll get to in more detail, it's just the squad depth. I mean, we're bringing on players. We're bringing Mikey Johnson on as a mixture striker. Our one striker that we do have goes off with a shoulder injury. Now, who would have thought that? you know, I mean, yeah, Johnson then goes off with a concussion injury, which I believe is a mandatory 21-day rest for him.
Yep.
We're basically one left back injury, and O'Reilly leaving away from an absolute crisis, actually. So we'll get to that later. But let's get to the positive. So three things very quickly that I thought really positive. One is Schmeichel. We've not seen him make a save yet of any note, but his distribution was excellent. He completed more passes in that match than any goalkeeper I've recorded in the 10 years I've been doing this. Equaled the highest for that. 5 pack passes, so good. His long passing was good. He just looks really competent to me. He's got that. He just oozes competence and confidence. James is probably more the goalkeeping expert than me, and there's probably, maybe not for this show, I don't think we've got time, but a conversation to be had about the physique of him relative to the likes of Foster and Hart. Bigger men, but with quite rigid, stiff frames. Schmeichel's quite a small guy for a goalkeeper, but he looks agile, he looks athletic, he looks, loose in everything that he does. The other one, obviously, is Kuhn. Kuhn was man of the match. He's kind of turning into a little bit, and I'm going to get accused of hyperbole here, but he's edging towards being Rogers Sinclair, but on the other side a little bit. And the reason I say that is he's all about the goal threat. He's had more touches in the box than any other player. Like, he's up to something like, he's averaging nearly 12 touches in the box now. The highest ever I've ever recorded on that is something like 8. Right, so we've got a long way to go. We've only played 2 matches. Celtic have been dominant, all that. So health warning. He's had more shots on goal than Lee Griffiths managed in the season that he scored 40 goals, which again is a record, over 6 shots. So these things are all indicative of a player who's getting into the box a lot, getting into shooting positions. Most of his shots have been in the box. So all that's really encouraging. He looks confident. The sort of slight nervousness and indecision that we saw from him, I think, last season, we seem to have moved beyond that. So that's all. That's all good. But listen, it's very early days, so I'm not jumping to conclusions on that one. And then, the last point for me in terms of a positive was just, again, another evidence of, Rodgers' strength with the squad. But much like Postecoglou took quite an average set of players and made them incredibly coherent. And I think we're seeing the same with Rodgers with this group as well. And we've seen it for 2 games in a row now. We saw it in pre-season. We saw what will happen to teams if they really want to have a go at Celtic and push up and almost go toe to toe with that first goal. 1-2 passes one over the top. You've then got 3 fast forwards that are reacting quicker than any of the Hibs backline did on that occasion. And if teams want to do that at any ground in the country, then sort of bring it on. But so yeah, despite all the moans, again a very promising, encouraging performance. But it's all very fragile. But we'll come to the recruitment later.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Alan. Just before I come to you, James, a couple of the points that you made there, I think, yeah, the standard of both Kilmarnock and Hibs was pretty shocking. In one hand, you think, well, maybe Celtic made them look that way, but there seemed to be so many defensive frailties and naivety and so forth. And there was talk about the second half and Hibs coming into it, but for me, they were so bad that possibly subconsciously the Celtic players kind of slowed it down a bit, seemed the game was won. There were substitutions, which you alluded to later, and the quality players, again, we'll talk about that later, it didn't quite match. I'll come back in a few minutes, but I'm very interested to hear James's opinion. James, do you agree with what Alan's saying? Anything you'd like to maybe add or take us in a different direction?
I think it's I always come back to, does the opposition make the game easier or harder as far as how they're set up?
Yeah,
And boy, did they make it easy. And I think that was reflected with both of the goals. And one being that, I mean, they were kind of defending against us like Man City did with a high line. And you know, obviously nowhere near the quality. And that's I think the positive to take out of this is, and I suspect this is the direction we're going to be heading, given how Rodgers set up last season in the Champions League, is we're going to set up more conservatively as a counterattacking team, not purely, but tilting that direction versus what Ange Ball was in Europe. And Kuhn, Kyogo, Maeda, I mean, that's going to be a formidable attacking three, even if we're, as we've often been doing, kind of defending in 4-4-2. To be able to break like that and to have somebody like Kuhn who can deliver those kind of balls over the top, or even if we're losing O'Reilly. So, but again, I've long been of the view of teams of the Hibs level having a go, so to speak, and playing that kind of high line, particularly with the people that we had available. It was different when we were, not having functional wing play last season and just, dealing with major injuries in the back line, that kind of thing. So that was an example. Like, their average pressing and defensive distance from their own goal was much higher than what you typically have trouble with when you get a well defended, organized St. Mirren team, for example. When they can make it very nervy for the first 60 minutes, that kind of thing. The other thing was the goal from McGregor. I mean, if you go back, and I did, because I don't rewatch every game these days. Certainly not with the acuity that Alan does with his data capturing. But I went and watched a good bit of this one because I was just like, okay, how were they actually set up? And they were
yeah,
defending in numbers out wide at a way that, I don't know if it was purely just disorganization or if they were that insane. But if you looked at, the McGregor goal, they had 4 players, outside of 20 yards away from their goal towards the touch line. I mean, it was like the simplest little pass took out their entire left side of their defense, and he had about 10 yards of space with no one even close to him. Um, to me, this goes back to a lot of being a quality defensive team is about structure, space, and not being dumb. And I think they were pretty dumb. So that made it look easier to Alan's point to some kind of, it wasn't O'Reilly's probably his best game either. So there was, um, we were able to really leverage the athleticism that we had out wide, I think, partly because of how Hibs decided to play. The downside of that, so this is where the masking of a poor opponent or even a better opponent that plays poorly, because that can happen too. There were three, as I like to call them, jailbreak sequences that Hibs had, where they just completely flubbed it. Where they had 4 or 5 attackers that did not have any of our midfield between them and our back line. So it was basically 2, maybe 3 of our defenders with a full charged Hibs side with 3 or 4 attackers on an onslaught, and they didn't get a shot from me in any of the 3. I mean, that's, so you had superiority in numbers, in space, no real pressure on the ball, and they had the ability to screw that up massively on all 3 occasions. So it's those kind of sequences in transition where, if you think about that, they were taking all of this risk to play the higher line, to press, and to their credit, I think their pressing was actually fairly smart at times. I mean, they were setting traps for Scales. I mean, that's part of what Alan was talking about. You get a lot of that now. Teams are setting traps for Scales and letting him have the ball, and then playing that first pass as the trigger, and then trying to put that pressure on him. So there was some of that. Like, you kind of see what they were trying to do. But when you have 3 big opportunities and you flush them all down the toilet, the risk reward on that strategy, like, it'd been different if they would have scored 1 or 2 of those, or at least had shots taken.
But James, was I right in thinking? I'm sure I saw that Greg Taylor, who he may not be I think he's our fittest player, but he's probably also one of our slowest players. Maybe take out the centre backs. Was actually matching Martin Boyle for pace. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
that was weird. I mean, Boyle was one of the quickest players in the league. I mean, he's had
Yeah.
terrible injury problems, right? And I think that was a big problem for them. They probably thought they could get one-on-one Boyle v Taylor, but Boyle's legs look like they've gone.
agreed. Yeah, whether that's a fitness issue or he's at that age where you start losing a half or a full step. So yeah, I actually tweeted about that. Is he cooked? Because
Yeah.
yeah, but he was another one. Like, he had, even when he did have opportunities, the decision making. I mean, their decision making on the ball and the attacking third was atrocious. So yeah, I saw a lot of positives because I think some of this will scale to the Champions League.
Yep.
And echoing Alan, Kyogo's movement and the way that he's being deployed. We'll get to that in the third segment, I think, because
Yes.
it may not be applicable to some other players, but yeah, and I think Johnston. I mean, it just seems to be more of a settled organizational situation as far as roles, and those are all positives. But ultimately, it's going to come down to personnel, and that's what we'll get into more as we talk about the transfer window and squad composition.
Sure. Just a kind of final thing from myself there in some of the comments, and I suppose to also answer the question from my point of view. I think back to this time last season, and we're looking at 0-0 draws at home to St Johnstone and so forth, and pretty slow passing. And I thought that the 2 games this season have continued from the friendlies. I've been really struck and pleased by the speed of passing, the movement off the ball. I think Matt O'Reilly's phenomenal in that sense, really. And even though he didn't have maybe his best game, he was still doing a lot of great defensive work. He was also making the movements and all the rest of it. So the speed in that sense was great, and more than anything, probably the pressing. It reminded me a bit of the Postecoglou side of things. As soon as you lost the ball, you were right on it. In the first half, a lot of Hibs' problems I felt came from that, and maybe lost a bit of confidence. They weren't able to do anything with the ball. And it was only when Celtic really stood off them in the second half that Hibs started to come into the game. But as I say, overall, an awful lot of very good things. I wouldn't disagree with any of the points that I've made. Some really good points as ever.
Well, and I threw real quick, Martin. It'll be we're not going to talk much about the game coming up on the weekend, but it'll be interesting to see how or if Gray makes some adjustments.
Yeah, a
Young,
new manager as
relatively.
well, isn't it? So
Yeah, and a cup game's a little different than a league game, so it'll
yeah,
it'll be
yeah,
interesting to see if any tweaks he makes um,
absolutely.
going into the weekend.
In terms of how we look at positions, both within maybe the squad and the first team, which areas would you like to see improved upon?
Yeah, so I think we're in a unfortunate, well, it's unfortunate, it's or incompetent position, if you prefer, of having a squad that's simultaneously far too big and yet lacks a lot of depth and quality. This is the issue that we have with too many professional players, too many first team squad players, and not enough quality, and we're actually badly exposed in many areas. Yeah, and nothing I'm going to say is probably going to be particularly, unique here or different to what other people would say. I guess we've got a left back situation where Greg Taylor, as he enters his 27th year, is out of contract at the end of the season. There's no chatter or hint that that's going to be extended. And we know that in any case, we probably need an upgrade in athleticism. Certainly, I think Taylor does a great job. I think he's a very admirable player, and he's somebody I'd be absolutely delighted to see in the squad as a sort of squad player. Whether he sees himself in that role at the age of 27 is doubtful, frankly. And fair play to him if that is the case. We have a young lad, Matt Anderson, who, by all accounts, is well thought of, but well thought of as we're seeing with Bosan Lowell, with Daniel Kelly, with Rudy Vata, isn't enough to say that you're actually good enough as far as Brendan Rodgers is concerned to be part of that first team squad. I have no idea what's happened to Adam Montgomery. I just disappeared off of all communication, no mention of him on squad lists, no sign of him in pre-season. So we're down to one left back, so that's clearly an area. And actually, a lot of the chatter that seemed to surface today on the back of the Idah deal seemingly gone through the legals and financials is there were a few left-sided players mentioned in dispatches that I've heard. So maybe hopefully we are looking in that area. At centre back again, we've got too many. It looks like Kobayashi and Lagerbielka are absolutely surplus to requirements. So for everybody's sake, we need to get those guys off the wage bill. That leaves us with two injury-prone backups in Welsh and Nawrocki. Again, I don't know what their long-term future holds. So there's clearly a need there to strengthen in that department. And I sit here for the third summer in a row talking about the lack of athleticism in central midfield. That left-hand side of the defence, Scales, Taylor, Hatate, at Champions League level, we're just going to get ripped to shreds down that side. There's no, I can't. I'm not prevaricating anymore. I'm just saying it. It needs to be sorted. We need more athleticism in the midfield. If O'Reilly leaves, then doubly so. Really. So, that we've got a lot of wingers that we need to prune. Clearly, ones that aren't fancied. So we need to strengthen that area. And if Idah does sign, and it's not all done until it's done. We're still probably short in the striker department. So, that's five. I think we're 5 players short, and I don't mean 5 squad players. I mean, I think we've got plenty of squad players that could be serviceable as squad players, but I think we're 5 players that we would be happy to start on a regular basis, i.e., week in week out. Short. That's a huge number. That's half a team effectively. But did a good job on the goalkeeping front, so let's acknowledge that. But as for the rest of it, we've got a lot of work to do, in and out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's certainly the area that everybody seems happy about with the goalkeeping for the first time in years. Even when Joe Hart was here and did a great job. There was always that, what if he gets suspended? What if he gets injured? So there was that real lack of any realistic backup. What's your kind of view on it, James? Do you agree with Alan?
As I created my list, and for me, left center back. I mean, I know all the talk because there's so many obvious ones, and left back being the glaring one that's been for a while. To me, that's an urgent depth issue for the obvious reason. Like Taylor sticks out even more with his athleticism because of the nature of what Alan talked about, meaning that left side. And God help us if Might is not there to help cover the left side. I mean, it really would become a kind of a even domestically a potential problematic issue. So it's not that I don't prioritize left back. It's just I have that second behind left center back, and to me that's because of the issues not only around defending in Europe and presumably against kind of the top 3 or 4 better teams domestically who can actually put together possession and reasonable counterattack and have some speed. Like you can imagine that new right back at Hearts running full charge at our left side on defense. Like he's probably not a world beater, but man, the guy sure looks fast, right? So just some of that basic stuff where you see players with athleticism that stands out domestically, but also in build-up, and so when opposition can game plan the way that teams now are doing against Scales, um, it creates real issues. And so to have more balance in the team, and I looked at uh, the side that played against Motherwell in Rogers' last game before he left for Leicester, and uh, the back 4 was Kieran Tierney, Christopher Ayer, Dedrick Boyata, and then the lone player Toljan, right? Or Tolian, however you want to pronounce it. And then you had Ryan Christie in that team. You had a much younger James Forrest. You had Odson Edward. So right there, you've got 5 players, and then 6 you could argue, peak Forrest. That was right around peak Forrest, which would have been on the cusp of like a Big 5 league quality of talent. Right? You can make this, all of them except for Forrest did play in, even Boyata went on, I think, to his Union Berlin and did fairly well in the Bundesliga. So, that's the kind of talent that we had on a team that needed to get upgraded, on a team that had to bunker away to Valencia and play 5-4-1. And here we are, 5 years later, effectively, with Liam Scales as the first choice left center back. So to me, that's the glaring issue. And it's not like I think he can be a serviceable squad player, to fill in when needed domestically, but that reach, that aspiration of upgrading for Europe, I mean, I think that's the big one. And then left back, and again, I've been a broken record along with Alan as far as central midfield. Was disappointed to see that it didn't work out with Lawwell, mostly because he just had the size and the speed.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it was a mistake to get rid of him. Who knows? He didn't seem to be necessarily as technically advanced in tight spaces on the ball. So he may be a better fit as, kind of a box to box on a less possession dominant, technically required side that we play with. But something closer to Lawwell physically, with maybe an upgrade in the technical ability. In that box to box ability would be my strong preference as far as prioritizing. If we get the dream list out, then you can upgrade in a bunch of different places. But those are like the first 3 there. I say I like de minimis, and that's even without O'Reilly be getting sold. We need that.
Yeah.
So if you sell O'Reilly, then we're talking, probably 2 midfielders in order to address some of these issues in Europe.
I guess that we've probably still got Riley McGree's telephone number before he rejected us. We could see if Middlesbrough are interested in a barter somewhere along the line. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think for me, you nailed it, last episode, and you mentioned it again today. Just that the volume of players that we got are squad fillers, many of whom don't contribute, and the ones that are coming in and contributing don't really add much at all. I think for the right back area, I think Ralston comes in and does a pretty good, steady job. Quite happy with a bit of cover there. I always look at it in terms of watching a match when I see a player go down and there's a hush. And we get that with Kyogo. We get that with Carter Vickers. Even Greg Taylor now, is not a world beater, but a good player. We're like head in hands when we see some players going down. And in central defence, you've already said about the injury side of things. Well, we're only a couple of games into the season. Mikey Johnson with the concussion injury going to be out for about 21 days from that. Palmer as well, irrespective of what we might think of him, he's picked up an injury. Kyogo seems to be getting buffeted about by the hammer throwers in the Scottish game. I suppose the only other thing that I would kind of consider and hope is that now that Rodgers has had a good full season with some of the young players that came in, I'm thinking maybe Odin Holm. Can he make any progress? Can he be someone who we can trust? Kuhn now compared to last season, it's night and day in my opinion. If he can get a tune out of Yang, which I'm not really convinced of, but that would be quite something. But Mikey Johnson again, that's our third striker, folks, I think, isn't it? Going through. So due a testimonial, I believe, in about a year's time, Mikey. So we're keeping that in mind. I think that's his 10th year almost with us. But yeah, there seems to be that kind of make do and mend where possibly Maeda could come in and do a job through the middle, but as you mentioned earlier, James, you're then vulnerable down the wings in that sense. So I would love to see us, again, we're looking at dream list, but central defender, since Starfelt wasn't without his faults, but goodness me, is far superior to anybody else there to partner Carter Vickers. The other guys can come in. Scales, I think, has gone beyond expectation in terms of how solid he's pretty much been, and he's done a good job. Not good enough, though, really, to be a starter, in my opinion, for where I want Celtic to be. The forward's an obvious one that we'll be coming on to soon as well, with the recent developments, looking at a goal scorer, looking at a centre forward. Midfield, very much so. There's no real athleticism, much of a muchness. We've got your Awatos and so forth, again, can come in and do some sort of job. Bernardo, again, we seem to have a lot of, in my opinion, and maybe you'll correct me, but a lot of very similar players. James, this could be Liam Shaw's breakthrough season.
I've been holding out hope.
Something. Brendan Rodgers, man, what a guy! So we can but hope. I'd like to move on a little bit now to maybe consider the recent developments. It seems we can almost get that smell of the white smoke coming through the chimney. We're making a signing. We're signing a forward so close we can almost touch it, as Kevin Kelly would say. So, Idah, what I found kind of interesting about this, it's been going on so long. Was there a plan B if we didn't manage to get him? And it kind of was also making me think of the recent transfer activity in Scottish football with Miovski at Aberdeen. A lot of Celtic fans were kind of talking about Miovski as a possibility. And I think, Alan, again, if you don't mind, if I come to you first, I wondered what your thoughts were on the recent developments in terms of who's kind of get the best value for money in your opinion, whether it be Girona with Miovski or Celtic with Idah, and also if we could kind of further look into that, if we took the money out of it as well, who would you take out of the two of them? If it was the same wages, same transfer fee, in your opinion, who would fit best with Brendan Rodgers' Celtic?
Yeah, I mean that's probably with Idah we've done the loan, the try before you buy model, which has served Celtic quite well over the years. I'm a great fan of it. I think you get a lot of a lot of issues, a lot of the difficulties in terms of negotiations. You get that done up front, um, and everyone's still got a chance to walk away. So I think it's a good model. Ida clearly, to me, it appears, as it's my opinion, really, it appears to be almost a sort of red line for Rodgers that he get Ida signed this summer. Hence why I think the club has spent enormous amounts of time and energy on this deal. And I think a consequence of that is possibly, and again, it's just my opinion, possibly that we've not spent as much time and energy on other deals. And I think it's only yesterday, really, that it become a little bit clearer to everybody why the Ida deal has been so protracted. And it's actually, not necessarily the incompetence of people on the Celtic side. It's the fact that Norwich City are in the middle of actually selling the club from Delia Smith and her group to an American group, and actually the Ida sale has been about milking as much cash as possible into the business to make it more attractive for sale. I think I read that the Ida money on its own represents more than 10%, somewhere between 10 and 15% of the value of the club. So that clearly makes the sale a lot easier a proposition for Delia Smith and her group to the new owners to get that deal done. From all I've heard, Norwich were asking for a ridiculous amount of money for Ida, and Celtic have actually negotiated it down to somewhere. So I've heard 7.5 million, 8.5 million, with £1 million add-on. So you take your pick on those two numbers. Um, you know, so listen. Rogers wanted him. I think he's probably his number one pick. So I think we respect that. It's good that he wants him. He knows him. We've seen him. I would characterise Ida as being the most similar player I've seen was another Rogers loan signing, which was Timo Way, that James probably knows better than I. I'd call him like an all-round forward. He can do a bit of everything. He's quite good pulling wide. He's quite good running channels. He's a big, strong, athletic guy, good in the air, etc. So my view on Ida is probably slightly less romantic, I would say, than many in the support for two reasons. One obvious one, and one is because and people quote this at you when you question, oh, why would he spend all that money on Ida? Well, yeah, but he scored that late winner at Motherwell, the late winner at Hibs, and 2 goals in derby matches. And as James and I have spoken about, that's really compelling for a fan. That's because that is like the fairy dust, the magic dust, and always a player that produces magic dust. And listen, we're all in it for the magic dust, right? We love it absolutely. And if he is a player who specifically can deliver when the pressure is on, that is a good thing. That is a strong attribute that speaks to his mentality, his focus, his concentration, all of that. So that's all that I'm not dismissing that. It is a good thing. But as I keep saying, we don't look at those, the cumulative minute that those actions took. We look at 90 minutes per game and what did the player do. Okay, so therefore I've got a slightly more prosaic view of Ida and his capabilities. I'm not against the signing, mainly because I think he's somebody who was probably not in a good place at Norwich. He came to Celtic. He got Rodgers' love and the arm around the shoulder, and he did play well, and he was very effective. And if that's what it takes to bring out the player within, and he keeps performing at that level consistently, then that's all good. That's all good. In terms of comparing him to Miovski, that's tricky. We've not seen Miovski in a Celtic shirt. What I will say is that when I have watched Miovski, I'm very impressed by his first touch. I look at two things that strike me about any player. One is first touch. Second is their balance. So that's their ability to withstand we talked about Lowell and perhaps his weakness being big, strong lad, but could he keep hold of the ball in tight areas? When you get to Champions League level or games where there's pressure, teams pressing you high, it's the players that can keep the ball under pressure. It's players that can perform the actions on the ball despite getting battered from side to side. And that's not just about physical strength. Liam Scales is 6'3" and continually gets bullied off a high ball. Liam Scales is not a small guy. He's not an unphysical person. Someone like Kyogo, he uses players' strength. He's the size of a flea, but he uses defenders' strengths against them. He's got what I call physical intelligence. So you don't. So this isn't just about size. It's about physical intelligence. It's about body shape. It's about core strength. It's about all sorts of attributes. So what I like about Miovski, first touch, technical ability, ability under pressure, his creativity of his passing, and obviously his finishing. The one thing that screams at me when I watch Miovski is, what would you be like in a good team, right? Because Aberdeen are not a great side. Yeah, no disrespect intended. They finished in the bottom six of the SPFL last year. That is not a good side by any stretch of the imagination. I go back to Tromso and Brann schooling teams that finished in our top six, right? You put Miovski surrounded by good players, I think you'd have a hell of a player. I really do. So I would have been very happy. There was never any suggestion that Celtic were after him, as far as I can tell. There was no chatter that I saw or any hint that Celtic were ever after him. So but he was a player clearly who, from a scouting perspective, you probably had very little to learn, given you played just up the road. You played against him a number of times. I would have thought at that price that would have presented excellent. He's only less than a year older than Idah as well. So in terms of growth,
Yeah.
so I'd have been all in for that. I would have been all in for Miovski. I'm not disappointed in Idah. In fact, I'm pleased that
Hmm.
the club got the deal done. We clearly need him. He did really well last season. If he grows, then that's brilliant. So that's all good. But yeah, Miovski, I think would have been. I thought it was really tantalising the gifts that he had, the abilities that he had. I think he was made for the Celtic side.
That's really interesting. And just as you say, playing in a better league with better players and against better players, it'll be really interesting to check in his progress. I think Girona were third in La Liga last season, above Atletico Madrid, who we know their abilities, much as I may despise them as a club. Very, very good football team. And what's your take on it, James? Same questions.
So I'm going to be a little more harsh than Alan was, and the reason why I'm going to be harsh is uh, partly because two people or entities that I think are of an elite level as far as operating within the game are confirming my bias and my analysis. So I'm going to use them as a sledgehammer here. So the first thing is Girona. So I made an error in a tweet yesterday that I ended up deleting and correcting, but because I was flippant on my phone and looked quick at something, and then I was like, "Oh, geez, I better look at this closer now that I've stuck my foot in my mouth, metaphorically." And so I looked at them more closely, and their wage bill last season. Data on this can be a little shaky, but in the neighborhood, they were around 20 million pounds for their squad. Uh, and yeah, which is about probably, and that's for the squad. I don't think that's necessarily their overall wage bill. So that's not an apples to apples to our 60 million. I estimate our first team squad wages are probably between 40 to 45 million. That's kind of my guesstimate. So they're about half of our resources, and they finished third in La Liga. They have about 1/5 the resources as far as what they spent as Atletico Madrid, who they obviously finished above in the league. Um, Obviously they were part of the city financial group, so they're getting access to resources that's not fair, so to speak. They've probably got access to analytics people that a club of their size oftentimes doesn't. But that speaks to the sophistication of them as a club, what they're getting out of the resources that they have available, how they're structuring their wage bill was interesting. They had this is where I screwed up. They had a 60,000 per week player on their wage bill, where I mean that's way above our high end. with less money than they're they're spending less, but the skew of how they're spending their money is different. So we're more, appropriately maybe socialist in our our wage bill, a flatter wage bill, so to speak. So they're a smart buyer, is what I'm getting at. This is the same case I made on a relative basis when a lot of people were lauding how much money we got for Jeremy Frimpong, and I'm like, Celtic's selling him to Leverkusen. Leverkusen's pretty smart, being they're not the most genius club. Actually, German clubs generally in the analytics era have not been on the high end, other than Red Bull. So so I immediately look at who's the party. And Girona's smart money. I think they probably see a lot of things that Alan suggested. But the second part of this is where I'm going to go to another person, which is Ian Graham, who was the head of research in analytics at Liverpool, and he's just coming out with a book. So he's out doing the dog and pony show on media to try and drum up book sales. Fair enough to him. I'm not casting any aspersions, but he was on whatever, the one Liverpool fan media, something Anfield. And I watched the some of the interview because one of our listeners sent it to me. I didn't go looking for this, by the way, so I'm going to blame that poor innocent listener of ours who sent it to me in a DM. And Graham's recounting of the era with Rodgers should send shivers down people's spines relative to the details of what went on. And I stress that. And I first want to preface it by saying this was 10 to 12 years ago. So every person hopefully learns, give Rodgers the benefit of the doubt. But there's some echoing going on here. And one of the things that Graham recounted was Rodgers' strong preference for Benteke at striker, and how the analytics group was basically strenuously arguing against it because of style of play differences, and that Benteke was really a striker for Aston Villa at the time, not someone who was, playing the ball on the ground. He was better, playing aerial balls from crosses wide, that type of thing. And there was a number of these type of preferences that Rodgers had, and he went directly in the contradiction with what Graham's group was saying. And again, this is skewed. It was Graham's version of events, so that's another caveat. But the reason why I say all this is, to me, Idah reflects more of a Benteke, whereas Miovski's more of, and first it was Lukaku that Graham referenced, and I think they tried to go to Diogo Costa, which again Rodgers didn't want and wanted Benteke. So, so I think there's an issue there potentially as far as the type of player that Rodgers might like and relative to style of play. And I think this whole issue of diversifying the way you play, having an option for a hold-up striker, and Graham talks about this in this interview. It's my view. I think it's well supported in more advanced analytics that the vast majority of strikers are not good at hold-up play. It's actually usually not a smart tactic for them retaining the ball and doing build-up through a dropping striker, unless you're Messi or, in our little world, Kyogo's pretty good at it. So I think there's a style problem here, or potentially, and I think Miovski would have been a better fit. I think that's where Girona sees him, because all the points that Alan referenced, he's got probably that extra class on the ball as far as being able to operate it with movement back to defenders, a more intricate build up and attack. And again, this is not an abstraction. So where I get, so that's all kind of fact like that. I'm just reporting the reality of who Girona are, and then what Graham said on this podcast. And then I'm laying over my opinion that, well, maybe Idah suits more of a Benteke profile. And that is supported through over 5,000 minutes of evidence of Adam Idah in the championship. And even in his very limited minutes at Celtic, he wasn't great on the ball and build up. And despite him being a big, fast guy, his ability to pick up the ball, turn, and dribble and move the ball up the field and do that successfully wasn't really in evidence. And if you look at some of his passing data, and this is going to give people, I say this tongue in cheek to elicit a response, so I'm being a jerk off here, even more so than usual, is he benchmarked pretty comparably to Vakun Bayo in the championship. And I didn't go looking for that, but when I sort my benchmarking, he was right next to him in some of his passing metrics. So, and again, if you look at, I mean, he's a big, fast, athletic guy. If he was really good technically, he wouldn't be at Celtic at that age. So he'd be going for 50 million instead of 7.5 million. So there's got to be gaps in guys' games, and I think that's on a sliding scale. Miovski's not as fast as him. Miovski's not as talented as him as far as an athletic, like speed, raw physical perspective. But I think from a kind of a raw technical skills perspective, that's where I think Miovski shines. And I think he would be a better fit as a primary Celtic striker, which I think for a number two, you kind of need that because of risk. If, in a perfect world, if we could have Miovski as the two and an Idah or a Giacomakis as a three, for example, people that can play that very specific targeted role if you believe in changing it up, that kind of thing, I'd be fine with that. But I'm going to echo what Alan said. Like, given I don't think Brendan Rodgers has an Ian Graham working at Celtic right now, meaning a physics PhD that has years of experience in advanced analytics in the industry. So it's only natural that someone's going to revert to their priors. So that's what Rodgers is doing. So I'm not being hypercritical of him, but I'm saying that he has a track record of having some of these issues. And with all that broad mosaic, that's kind of how I see the Idah signing. So on a relative basis, given what we could have ended up with, I'm okay with it. Like we've talked about this over the months since Idah was brought in on loan. In a perfect world, I think we could have done better, particularly given the amount that we've spent.
Yeah, I mean, I think some really, really interesting points that you both make. I suppose my own take on the Idah situation, getting him in, it seems to be those who aren't that happy, it's more to do with the money. But we've been kind of sitting on this pile of money, it seems Smaug-like, where if the manager really wants this guy, it doesn't really matter too much if we pay an extra couple of million to get him in the door. And I think Alan's point about the situation at Norwich, they know how much money we've got. They know we've got one forward. They're happy to sit and wait till the panic sets in because they sure as hell know this is Rodgers' guy and Rodgers is pushing and pushing for him. I'm pretty optimistic in the sense that because Rodgers has seen him, has worked with him, trusts him. I'm hoping he can really develop him into something special and be a real contributor. He's got a kind of similar profile in a lot of ways to Miovski in terms of his height and so forth, international background, age, and all the rest of it. But I think kind of picking up on what came up in the last podcast was about the lack of transfer activity, meaning that there was a kind of cohesive squad there and an understanding. And we've kind of at the moment got pretty much, other than the goalkeeping situation, the same squad as we had last season. So the difference being Idah came in, hit the ground running, made, as you talked about, the impacts, very, very important impacts that he did. He seems popular in the dressing room. There seems to be a kind of social thing there. Not as we saw under the season that will never be mentioned again. There was a lot of good socialising going on then. But he seems like someone who wants to play for the club. The supporters like him. He has turned up in the big games. The manager likes him. And I also like the idea of having the alternative. Different strokes, different types of players coming in for different games. Maybe one game would suit Kyogo, one game would suit Idah a little bit more. It gives you the option as well, unlike Rodgers really, but if he wanted to play Kyogo off Idah, that type of thing, just to cause some more problems for teams. So overall, I'm really happy, and I can imagine with some of the things online at the moment, Peter Lawwell and the board must be saying, "What? Well, we're getting criticised for spending too much money." The world turned upside down. From my point of view, really happy that he's seems he's going to be in the door at the time of recording. I think he's much needed, but I really hope that we're not going to end the window without some other some other potential recruits. Names are out there, and I really do think that we need them.
Well, let me summarize. Also, what I laid out was more of the vicious analytical approach to
Oh
looking at
yeah,
the signing. I look forward to rooting for him as a supporter. Like it's hard not to be excited about who he is and how he clearly wants to be at the club, how he's very likely to be a motivated professional. He offers a lot of very exciting qualities. We don't get people that big and fast all that often, so it's that's just really cool in and of itself.
can he play
Um,
centre half?
yeah, well, we need to get him,
A Tom
and
McAdam style,
right, maybe we can turn him into one. So yeah, that's So I'm excited to see him play. It's just more so from a ruthless analytical approach.
and rightly
When
so.
Yeah. So
Yeah, well, listen, I think
well,
the
go ahead, Al.
conversation we had, the conversation that we had on Miovski was kind of an academic conversation because, as I say,
Yeah.
there was never any suggestion that Celtic were interested. It was and the undercurrent to that conversation. It's the same, really. I think the point that James is making here is, in terms of keeping people happy, right? I think the majority of fans will be happy if we address the positions that we listed earlier in the pod. Everybody will be happy. I will still be I will be quite happy, but not totally happy. And the reason for that is that what we're trying to get at in having this conversation is how we got to the point where we're signing Adamina, right? And that is that will be the concern because we appear to have moved, as I say, from a position where it was CEO as God and head of director of football to a world where it was manager and super agent as God, and now it's just manager as God. Right now, I don't think Brendan Rodgers wants to be in that situation. I think he wants to be on the training ground. He wants to be working with his players. He wants to be devising a strategy that means we don't get beat 6-0 in the Champions League game. Instead, he's being forced to play the role of head recruiter and director of football at the same time. That isn't right. He's paid a lot of money, but he shouldn't be playing three roles. And then essentially, it means that our recruitment is being driven down the road of shopping in the very expensive English market, which Rodgers knows well. There's no evidence that we are being creative and analytically driven in terms of where we're shopping for our targets. So we could end up getting the 5 players I think we're short, and I'll still not be happy because until we don't fix that fundamental structure of how football strategy, recruitment, and scouting is done at the club, we're always going to be struggling. Always going to be struggling.
I think that's as good a place to end as any, Alan. I think that really sums things up superbly well. I'd just like to, before I hand over to James to close us out, thank you both very much for having me on here. Thoroughly enjoyed it. If there's any opportunities in the future, be delighted to join you again. If not, I shall certainly continue to be an avid watcher and listener. So thanks ever so much. I've enjoyed being the wind beneath your wings this week. Thank you.
Well,
Very good.
thank you, Martin. And I don't know, we're going to have to confer whether we throw you off the island or if you match up or what's going on here. But no, just tongue in cheek. No, we sincerely appreciate you being willing to come on, reach out. As I mentioned at the intro of last week's show, we're still trying to figure out what the heck it is we're trying to do with the new season, and part of that is the production side. There's this is all speaks to the gaping hole that Judas Endicott left by deserting us and going off to lollygag in Australia. So this is a testimony to his departure and all of the stuff that he was doing that no one knew about to make this dopey show run every week. So thank you, Martin. Alan and I will be back in some incarnation next week. We have no idea what that'll be. But same time, same station. And thanks for joining us. Thanks again, Martin. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.